Hi, Seth David here, and I want to talk about what's the difference between a bookkeeper, a controller, and a CFO. I think for most people it's pretty clear the bookkeeper's role is different compared with the controller or CFO. It may not be as clear where the CFO and the controller kind of part in terms of their responsibilities. And with most smaller companies, these roles are often all integrated, and to a large extent, the owner of a small business is often performing these roles without even realizing that they're doing it. For example, and I've been talking a lot, writing a lot about working backwards, right? So in terms of to-do lists, I've been saying put the last thing you want to accomplish today at the top of the list and work your way down with all the activities that you're hoping to accomplish today. And that way you can make sure that then you go back and put in the end time when you want to be finished with that last task and work your way backwards to make sure that you realistically have enough time in the day to get all the things done that you're hoping to. And in many respects, I think that's kind of the CFO's job in a company. That's the CFO's role. Working backwards, the CFO is the one who's going to really want to be able to see the vision financially of, they're going to perform a lot of functions, but it's all going to boil down to one thing essentially, which is how do I build the net worth of this company? How do I make sure that the net worth of my company keeps increasing? And they're going to set the end in sight. They're going to set their goal. They're going to lay out the yardsticks by which they want the company to perform. And of course, they work with the CEO and the controller on these matters, and if there is one, a chief operating officer, the COO. But ultimately, the CFO's goal and responsibility is going to be to lay out those yardsticks and build a financial model. The financial model is your projection. It's going to say, let's look out in the future and see how we can expect this company to perform, taking into account market conditions and anything else we can, what we know about the company's past performance, if there is one, and that's where the controller is going to come in. But the CFO is going to look at this stuff and project out and say, over the next year or two, how do we expect to perform? Now, if you're seeking venture capital, then we know that the classic model is to do a 5-year model. If you're doing it for internal purposes, I honestly feel it's a waste to go beyond 1 or 2 years out into the future, because I don't care who you are, I don't care how good you are, there's no way you can possibly know what's going to happen, and so much can happen that can change things so dramatically that you can't possibly know now where you're going to be financially, that specifically at least, in the next 5 years. I think you can lay out a 1 to 2 year model and then keep revisiting it to make sure that you're on track. And if you find that you're not on track or getting off track, that's the point of the constant review. These are the CFO's responsibilities. And then finally, once the CFO has that in place, he or she is going to use that information to secure financing for the company. They're going to go to the banks, make sure they have the right lines of credits, that they have the right access to cash so that they have the working capital that they need, the resources that they need to invest into the company, and make sure that the company has what it needs to grow and to meet their goals of increasing the company's net worth. Then we have the controller. The controller's job basically is to, in simple terms, to provide the information that the CFO is going to need in order to do what I just described. What does that mean in reality? It means for the CFO that they want to really look at 5 different things. First of all, they want to present the financial statements. They have to look at a profit and loss and a balance sheet and a statement of cash flows. And they have to look at it in terms of essentially 5 criteria. The first of the 5 criteria is called existence or occurrence. In other words, when I look at these financial statements and the financial statements tell me that certain transactions occurred or that I bought a piece of equipment, does it really exist? Did it really happen? I have to be able to support that. I need the right documentation in place. And the controller is going to set up the systems to make sure that we capture the information and also that we capture the documentation that supports it. So if my balance sheet says I have a piece of equipment that cost me $5,000, there's an invoice somewhere that shows that that piece of equipment cost $5,000. And of course, obviously, I can walk somebody over to the place at the facility where the equipment is located and point to it and say, here's where that piece of equipment is. The next thing is completeness. Is everything that is supposed to be included on the financial statements in fact there? This is where we jump over to the bookkeeper for a minute. The bookkeeper is going to reconcile bank statements and credit card statements in order to ensure completeness, in order to ensure that we didn't forget a transaction, that nothing is missing. Then we have valuation or allocation. A lot of valuation is going to be pretty straightforward. It's going to come from the fact that I've entered a bill at the amount that's in fact stated on the bill. That's how I know its value is there. But the controller's job is really going to be to take a second look at that and make sure are things stated at their proper values. If I've bought a piece of computer equipment and for some reason maybe some new technology has emerged in the past year that has really caused a significant devaluation of that piece of equipment, maybe I need to record a write-down. Again, I want to make sure that the financial statements, as a controller, I want to make sure that the financial statements fairly represent the financial position of the company. And these all are things that play into that. Rights and obligations. If I say that I have a certain amount of accounts receivable, do I in fact have the rights to collect those monies? Is there some dispute going on with a client that might mitigate my ability to collect those? And that's where we get to the last part where we talk about presentation and disclosure. Disclosure is where we have to make representations. If I think there's a very good chance that I'm not going to be able to collect a significant receivable, but I haven't decided to write it off yet, I probably want to disclose that so that somebody who's reading my financial statements, whether it's the CFO or the person potentially investing in my company, so that they have a fair opportunity to assess the financial position of my company. Now you might say, why would I want to disclose something like that to a potential investor? It's going to make them not want to invest. And the reason is very simple. Besides the fact that you want to be honest, and that's important from a moral standpoint and a standpoint of integrity, you also want to make sure that you've given full disclosure, because if the person invests and something goes wrong, the company goes out of business, God forbid, and then the investor finds out that there was this dispute that they weren't told about, guess what they're going to do? They're going to sue you, and they're going to say that you misrepresented the company in terms of its financial position. So you always want to be honest. You always want to give full disclosure so that you're covered, so that nobody can come to you later and say, hey, you didn't tell me about this. You can say, no, I absolutely did tell you about this. Here's the financial statements. Here are the disclosures. So that's the controller's job. And then finally we have the bookkeeper, the poor bookkeeper, who really is tasked with the responsibility of entering all this data, which is going to be reviewed by the controller, which is then going to be used by the CFO. So the bookkeeper really has the responsibility, I think, of being able to understand not just how to enter and post a bill, but how to understand how that bill, when they post it, is going to impact the financial statements. I think the bookkeeper has a substantial responsibility to understand how what they're doing is going to impact the jobs of the other people, because there are many people who use these financial statements, and it may seem like one individual transaction is not going to be significant enough to make a difference, but collectively all the individual transactions are going to add up to one big set of financial statements, which does make a big difference. And I think so few bookkeepers understand really how what they're doing impacts those financial statements. They're entering a bill, they're saying, okay, it's for utilities, it goes to the utilities expense, and I'm done posting the bill. And for stuff like that, it might be simple. But you get into areas that are more complicated, like payroll. I've done a whole video recently on payroll and where that's almost always done wrong by bookkeepers whose work I've picked up on. And you have things I mentioned earlier, the loans. When we have loans that we're paying off, all too often bookkeepers I don't think, from what I've experienced, really understand the difference between interest and principal. The interest is on the P&L, the principal is on the balance sheet. They don't really realize the impact. So I think it's important that bookkeepers understand how what they're doing, how the transactions that they're posting will impact the financial statements. And I think that's missing in a lot of places. And that's pretty much it. That's your description. Read it in the blog post. I've got it kind of summarized and outlined in a manner that might help you really understand this. And if you have any questions, give us a call at 866-945-8070. We'll be happy to review your balance sheet or your business model and tell you what we think in terms of how you should set it up, how you should set up the financial books and the bookkeeping, and we'll be more than happy to work with you. That's what we do. Look forward to seeing you on the web.